I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creepin' and crawlin'. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussin' and fightin', and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussin' and fightin', and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Well, yeah, well, of course, not exactly here, of course, because both she and I are in our respective living rooms, quarantined because of the COVID virus, like everybody else. And Rebecca, you weren't able to get on last week, but I was telling people last week about how, when you drive up to the radio station and you get out of your car and the valet comes and takes it, and you walk up all those concrete steps and then under those gigantic arches with all the pillars at the entrance to the station, you kind of get this feeling that you're about to do something amazing. And so, you kind of lose that edge when you're in your own living room and just sitting around whatever. So last week I wore a tuxedo in order to keep that mental edge going. It worked, but I think it was kind of uncomfortable. So this week I'm just wearing a nice Italian suit that I bought when I went to go to a wedding for one of my cousins, and I think that's going to do the job. I think we're going to stay, edge and have that cutting,
matches my gold lame evening gown.
Oh, gold lame evening, very nice.
Yeah,
good choice, Rebecca. Yeah.
Thank you.
And and we have a good show too. We have a special guest, hopefully calling in if everything goes right, and we are actually going to have Tom Henry, the reporter for The Blade, who's an eco reporter. He's covered the environmental beat for basically forever in this region, and so that'll be nice. And of course we'll have our usual features because we're going to carry on in this time of COVID. We're going to have our eco news after the break, after we hear from our fantastic sponsors, and our letter from the future. Although this week's letter, it's pretty short. It's more of a note than a letter, and we'll just wait. I'll read it to you at the appropriate time. So, but one thing that this is an appropriate time for is getting out and about in the time of COVID, and that's the one thing they let us continue to do is go out to the parks, and as long as you maintain that social distance, which I have to say a lot of people haven't been. But I went out walking with a friend, and we all stayed 6 feet apart from each other and so forth. And I noticed, I believe this was on Wednesday, I noticed that the sky was the clearest and bluest I think I've seen it since I was a kid. No contrails, air traffic is down immensely, and the air was really clean. You could just take that deep breath and not feel like you had to cough afterwards. And I was just thinking, how wonderful that is, and thinking about the fact that it doesn't have to be a disaster like this that gives us that kind of a clean, green sort of atmosphere. I mean, ideally what we should be doing is having enough pollution laws in place. We should be getting the technologies in place that are necessary to give us this kind of beautiful, clean sort of environment without having to suffer the economic damage of everybody just staying home and businesses closing up. That's not what we environmentalists want at all. I mean, at least it's not what I want. Is that what you want, Rebecca? Or
not really, no. There's been some controversy on Facebook, as there always is controversy on Facebook about, oh, you shouldn't be gloating about the environment being good because there's people aren't doing anything. But see, we can do that without COVID-19, and then it would be all nice and fun, and everything would be good.
Right. That's the whole point of For a Green Future.
Right.
We can have a future this green without having to collapse the economy to get it. And I think that one of the keys to that is applying the technologies that we have, the technologies, and switching over to the technologies that we need. And of course, one of the technologies we have is solar power, and that technology has been around for many decades now. Actually, solar power was first invented way back. They first had practical solar power panels all the way back in the 1950s. But it's been basically the technologies that have been competing with wind and solar, like nuclear and coal, have repressed those technologies. That's why it's taken us all the way to 2020 to get to the point where they're actually being applied. And
can't you actually?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Can't you actually get like primitive solar power by just putting some dark rocks in the sun and then bringing them in your house at night?
Oh yeah, thermal power, thermal heating. That
I think I read about that in Ranger Rick's Nature magazine as a child.
Yeah, and that is a perfectly practical method of heating your home if you've got a large mass. They call it a thermal mass, and typically what it would be you'd have in your basement something like a big concrete block or something that you would pump in the hot air from your solar furnace. It was called a solar furnace, and it was really just glass with baffles that would get hot, and then you just blow air over that and blow that air down into your basement thermal mass, and you could store heat there, physically store heat that you could tap later on to heat your home. And yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of technologies that all we need to do is apply them and refine them and get better at them, the way we finally are with solar. I mean, my wife and I finally went ahead and we ordered a 6 kilowatt solar power system, and we're hoping it's supposed to be delivered within the next 2 weeks. And, you know, we have been talking about getting solar since we got married I can't even remember that second digit, 30 plus years ago. And we finally, part of what finally pushed us over is that the cost has come down so much that we can afford it. And that has happened because finally the research has been done in order to make solar practical. And the physical constraints, the physical principles behind our new, more efficient solar panels, those principles were there 30 plus years ago. You know what I mean? It's not like we created them by research.
Right.
It's just, we just went looking and we found them. And so, we should have been looking decades ago, but other systems like coal, like nuclear, like natural gas, repressed what we needed to do for wind and solar. And so now we're in the situation where we're still, even though right now it is now the cheapest, the most practical, and the best forms of energy, wind and solar, they're still having to fight the nukes and fight the oil and fight the coal, and it doesn't make much sense. So if we close down those polluting sources, we could have air this clean without having to sacrifice our economy to get it. And
you're darn tootin'.
Well, thanks. And some examples, but there is a slight problem with the new technology ideas, something that you have to be careful of and watch out for. and that is that a lot of times industries will trot out some new wonder technology and say, look, here it is, we have the technical solution, and everybody goes, wow, great, we've got the technical solution, and just sort of assume it's going to actually be applied and actually will happen just because it's so logical it should happen. But that doesn't always actually transfer into real change in the economy. And sometimes companies and industries will take advantage of this and sort of deliberately show us all something that either is a solution or could be a solution to sort of get us all to back off and not actually pursue the real solutions that are available. And I'm afraid that one of these, and the reason I brought this up is because Frontline on PBS did a show this past week on plastic recycling. And plastic recycling, it sounds like this should be a solution. We've got plastic going into the oceans. We've got microplastic in all our bodies. I saw one estimate that now, because so much microplastic is built up in the environment, that each of us, just in the course of our daily living, eats about a credit card's worth of plastic every week.
Wow.
And so we have this solution of plastic recycling, but the way that technology, according to this Frontline article, actually works is that it ends up with most of the plastic being just dumped into the ocean or burned, or because what happened is we kept sending all our plastic over to China. China finally got fed up and said, okay, that's it, we're not taking your plastic anymore. And so the plastics suppliers searched around frantically, and they found the Philippines. So now a lot of our plastic is going off to the Philippines, where, yes, some of it is getting recycled, but again, most of it is apparently ending up, they keep, at night they'll find vacant lots, and they'll just dump bales and bales of plastic there and then set it on fire. And
so an actual good solution would be to not use so much plastic, right?
That's right. That is
what you're getting to
solution.
Here.
Right. The one that we need to apply is that we have to get off of petroleum-based plastics completely. And there is a possibility of using... are you making a cup of tea there, Rebecca?
A little bit. I just took the lid off the jar.
Oh, okay.
I'm done.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, the real solution, of course, are plastics that are made from things like corn, and plastics that are non-toxic and biodegradable, and those could replace the essential plastics in our society, things like the gloves and the tubing for medical supplies and so forth, and get off the petroleum-based, the oil and the natural gas-based plastics 100%. That is the solution. That we can't allow something like plastics recycling we can't allow that to divert us from the actual solution. So, and you'll see these stories. One story that's been getting a lot of play in the last couple of weeks are electric planes. And electric planes are cool because battery storage has gotten so efficient. They can store so much energy in such a light battery that now you can actually power planes with it. And that is a cool solution. And I don't think we should give up flight just because, I think flying is just too cool to give up. But if we can fly with electric planes, and if that electricity is produced with green energy, wind and solar, I think now we can keep going ahead and having airplanes. But we can't let the idea that, there's a solution out there, let us continue to invest in and expand the polluting planes and jets and so forth that we're using now that are destroying the climate, that are putting so much CO2 in the air. So that's just some thoughts I had this week, and we're also looking for your thoughts at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. This is a call-in show, and I like to say this is the best show in Ohio. But it gets better every time you call. And it's about to get a lot better because we do have a caller, and we are very happy to have on For a Green Future Tom Henry. Tom, are you with us?
I am, Joe.
Yes, welcome to For a Green Future.
Glad to be here.
Okay. Tom, if we could just start out with you sharing with the people a little bit about, who you are, who you've worked for, how long have you been reporting, and how long have you been covering environmental stories?
Well, I've been a journalist for 39 years now, starting since May of 1981 in northern Michigan at the Bay City Times. I fashioned myself of becoming a political writer and then decided I didn't want to do that and kind of got intoxicated by nature going out into the northern Michigan woods on a lot of different assignments, and I moved down to the old Tampa Tribune down in Florida and did a lot with manatees and other things with nature there. And when I came to Toledo in March of 1993, after a year in graduate school at Ohio State on a Kiplinger fellowship, and decided I wanted to specialize in something because I had done a variety of different beats up till that point, and I pitched on the idea of starting an environmental beat at the Blade. They hadn't had one before, and I've been at the Toledo Blade since March of '93. One of the people who hired me told me during my interview that I'll tell you, we think you're a really good writer. We're about to hire you anyways, but if you are offering to cover something like the environment that we're not already doing, that'll put you over the top. And I made it clear that that's what I wanted to do. And so it's become very fascinating over the years as I told about 250 people at a Ohio Environmental Council reception one time when I got a major award from them. I said this almost feels like my lifetime achievement for beating my head against a wall. But there's been a lot of frustration. It's been very fascinating seeing even how society has viewed environment in the relatively short time I've been here, which is now 27 years. Climate change is the obvious example.
Yeah, I guess geologically, that's pretty brief. But I didn't know that you. Yeah, I didn't know that you reported in Florida and with manatees. Have you ever actually touched a manatee?
No, I never did. I mean, you weren't supposed to actively, and you still aren't supposed to, as far as I know, actively try to touch one. But it's one of those things that manatees are so playful and friendly that if they come up to you, then it's okay. But you're not supposed to be the one initiating contact. But no, I know a lot of people have talked about it in a part of Florida where I lived in Citrus County. It had the biggest manatee refuge outside of Miami. They'll come in and harbor during the winter time, and be closest to the shoreline and inside this area known as Kings Bay, and it's a real neat thing. And ironically, I did one of my favorite stories was interviewing singer Jimmy Buffett and former U.S. Senator Bob Graham, and I did a pretty lengthy Sunday story one time on the unlikely alliance they formed in creating a group called Save the Manatees. And all the work that went into making that the state's largest environmental group at the time. I'm not sure if it still is or what, but Buffett especially was happy that I, didn't make him the focus, that I made the manatees the focus for that story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that touches on my next question there, is that, once upon a time, environmental support was there across the board societally. We didn't have the situation we've got now with some people actively resisting environmental stories and environmental news. So how would you say the environmental reporting has changed over the years?
Well, it's changed a lot, just like as society's values have. And I've told people before, unfortunately, a lot of times, environmental news is crisis-driven. I'm actually featured in a national magazine article, a magazine called Enzia.com, of journalists, an example of a journalist who has been sounding the warning calls for years before, it took a crisis for people to notice. And in this, in my case, it was with Western Lake Erie algae, having written about that for many years, since 1995 until the Toledo water crisis in 2014, that really woke people up about that issue. And another friend of mine in that article is Mark Schleifstein from in New Orleans, who wrote about the Hurricane Katrina, what would happen 3 years before it actually did. But to me, as I've told people, in the relatively short time, as I said, of 27 years here, it's been kind of a metamorphosis in thinking just about climate change. When I first started here, I didn't want to press the issue too hard or be branded as a Greenpeace activist and be taken off the beat, because there was a lot of, is this climate change thing real or not? And, James Hansen had just testified a few years earlier, 1988, I believe it was, to Congress with his landmark testimony. And in the 90s, early to mid 90s, I remember. Could you just
remind us what that testimony was, Tom?
Oh, it was the landmark testimony about the and there had been climate change studies linking man-made pollution to climate change going back to the 50s, but he testified before Congress that mankind is is having, with our greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide and methane and so forth, is having a clear definite impact on Earth's climate. But
that was 88.
I believe that was 88. Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
And into the 90s, just the tone of different scientists I remembered, and I can name names on some occasions where they would give presentations about effects that were happening to the Great Lakes or other things that all the multitude of seminars I would go to, and they would frame it as the evidence is kind of leading us in this direction, and we don't want to come out and say it's climate change, but there's more and more evidence, and it just, the whole acceptance of it really started taking off, I think, after the after the Nobel award that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I know that's a mouthful, but it's basically the group of United Nations climate scientists, and Al Gore's association with them. He became, the symbol of it. But it was something in which, the world's top climatologists, all were on board with that mankind is influencing our climate. But slowly things have changed, and now, as you know, there's a much more robust and stronger feeling just among ordinary citizens, and and others that are, accepting the science finally. Science that's gone back to Hawaii back in back in like 1957, I believe it was. It's frustrating, and you can see parallels in that, with the coronavirus. I'm not saying that, there's a direct cause and effect or anything between climate change and coronavirus, but I'm saying in acceptance of science, is there, how resistant is society to accepting what is very legitimate and very, very good science,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, it's a global disaster that's waking up a lot of people that, science is real and we need to accept it more.
Right. I think, for one thing, Tom, I wanted to assure you that you can be as green as you want to be on our show, on For Green Future. That's don't need to hold yourself back here. But, I think it's an important point that the COVID story really is an environmental story. I mean, from the idea, that this virus may have jumped from bats into pangolins and then into humans. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. We actually had a virologist on a few weeks ago, and people can go back to the YouTube and the podcast if they want to hear that. But what this fundamentally is a new viral disease entering a new population, and that is very specifically an ecological, an environmental thing. That happens all the time in natural populations, and we're just not used to it happening to us. But we are part of the environment. You kind of touched on this a little earlier, but could you tell us what some of your favorite eco stories have been over the years?
Well, I did the near disaster at Davis-Besse was very fascinating, from a technology standpoint of the corrosion of their original reactor head that came within 0.2 of an inch of bursting and forming radioactive steam for the first time in containment since 3 Mile Island. And I don't know if people still appreciate how, close to a disaster we were, and how big of a, shock and reverberations that had throughout the nuclear industry. The Western Lake Erie algae story. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we've talked about the hole in the head accident on a fair number of episodes, and actually it's becoming timely again. And we were going to touch on this after the interview, but I just want to mention here really briefly that one of the things that the NRC is doing in the midst of this COVID crisis is telling utilities that they don't have to do their inspections during their refueling. And it was a refueling inspection that discovered the hole in the head. And had that not happened, we would not be doing a nice radio show from Northwest Ohio right now. Most likely we'd be, as far from it as we could get. So, okay.
And just going back a little bit with that, what was kind of fascinating about the case in Davis-Besse too is that we can all thank ourselves to what happened at a plant in South Carolina, the Coney nuclear plant, because they had what are known as circumferential cracks in nozzles, and the problem, they were expecting and looking for vertical cracks, but they hadn't seen these circular circumferential cracks, and the fear was that it would pop off these nozzles under very high pressure, like champagne corks, and you would have radioactive steam spewing. And so there was a nationwide, basically, science, technical, mathematical exercise of the operating nuclear plants, and they narrowed the list down to 12 and then narrowed it down even more than that. And Davis-Besse was the last one that because of this problem in South Carolina, and they fought an early shutdown to inspect for that. They pushed it with the NRC. Their lawyers got involved because you shut down early, you're costing the utility money, and they got into basically a compromise. They wanted to shut them down 3 months earlier, and the NRC compromised and let them go another 6 weeks, before they had, the first emergency shutdown order in years that the agency had prepared. So when they finally went in there and inspected, they saw that they were not so much because of the circumferential cracks, but they were just possibly within days of an even worse disaster because of this reactor head. And in fact, laboratory testing at Oak Ridge National Laboratory Test showed it could have been a statistical fluke that the thing held together.
Yeah, we all got extremely lucky there.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah.
But you asked about, another big obvious story for this area would be the Western Lake Erie algae story, and that's still developing quite a bit, and it's very, very fascinating. I never knew my career would become so hyper-focused on algae, but that's a great example of, we don't really know as much as we think we do. When this story started in 1995, I was the only one doing it, and it was the first time the algae had reappeared since the 70s, and that type of toxic algae, and it was a different species back in the 60s, 70s, and so forth. But it was originally the butt of jokes on AM talk radio, and then it took 15 years for the Ohio Department of Health to even post warning signs at local beaches. I went out and did kind of citizen testing for the Blade with a couple of other reporters in 2010, and then saw little kids playing in an area near Maumee Bay State Park that was extremely highly polluted with the stuff. And now we're finding out the science behind it. It's this toxin called microcystin is one of the most toxic things in nature, other than dioxin. I mean, it's more toxic than arsenic and saxitoxin and some other things, and it's not anything to play around with. I've told people in different talks I've had that we kind of have this arrogance that we think we know all there is about water quality because we have this law that was passed in 1972 called the Clean Water Act. But a lot of people don't realize, a couple of years ago I checked, there were some 115 micro toxins such as microcystin and other types of pollutants that the U.S. EPA hadn't even set health standards for at that point. They've set an advisory since then, since the Toledo water crisis, for microcystin. And the only thing we had was the World Health Organization recommendation. But it's fascinating that there are so many varieties, like, coronavirus, so many strains and varieties of something that, the science is still being developed as we speak on things and how our ecology is changing. I know that's a frustration among scientists sometimes that, no matter how you study, you're almost never studying nature in real time because you take samples, you analyze, you write a paper, it gets peer reviewed, and you're waiting for, as one scientist told me one time, you may be, when some news if it gets picked up and published after being peer reviewed and everything else, it may be 2 years old compared to what's really happening in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that people don't realize that that these things, back in that law in the 70s, when we essentially regulated, for the most part, we regulated point pollution. We regulated what was coming out of the pipes at the factories. And that had such a beautiful, dramatic, immediate effect on improving the lakes. They went from being declared essentially biologically dead to, again, thriving ecosystems. I think a lot of people, as you say, thought, okay, we've solved the problem. But it turns out that non-point sources like farm runoff and other sources of pollution, like air pollution affecting water pollution, we now know that it's a lot more complicated than just, regulating what comes out of those pipes. And some of that, a lot of that has yet to be put into our regulations and put into our actual practice. I
mean, it's human nature. You go after the low-hanging fruit first, and that's what we did. But we really need to take it to a higher level with this diffuse non-point pollution, and that's where the battle is right now.
Right. All right. Well, Tom, I wanted to ask you one last question in this time of COVID. As you refer to, and as we like to point out in the show, I think the majority of people are on board with science now, that they agree on things like global warming. Their surveys saying around 70% accept the fact that there's human-made global warming. But we do have this minority, we do have this little kernel of resistance of people that essentially just reject science. They reject essentially knowledge. And so just what is it like as a environmental reporter to know that there's this sort of core of people out there that are going to reject whatever you report, even if it's soundly backed up by science, because it conflicts with some notion they have about how the world works?
It's a real balancing act, and you hit on one of the great frustrations among journalists, because, sometimes, people who are less experienced, think that, report one extreme and then report the other extreme, and the truth somewhere is in the middle. But there's not really balance in doing that here, as you said, with, when the evidence is overwhelming and you've got, 98% of the world's, climate scientists who are the ones we should be listening to. And that's part of the problem, is sourcing. Who are you listening to? Why are you listening to the Rush Limbaughs or the Glenn Becks or others who are just, even industry doesn't, listen to a lot of them. I mean, industry has some of the best scientists in the world who understand climate change, and, they may disagree over policy, but they know that climate change exists, and they're trying to, perhaps, resolve things in a way for their client, or make, at least get the information for their own companies and industry, but they don't outright reject it. And there's some
I think one thing that the COVID is proving is that they too, the businesses themselves, suffer if the whole system gets so badly affected by environmental problems that it affects their business.
Yeah, one thing that is, there's some media that thinks just ignore I don't think you can ever really ignore a real dissenting opinion, but it's always difficult showing the weight of how much, outside of readership opinion polling, what percentage of the population really is part of the fringe that you're talking about. So, you deserve to at least let people know that exists, but you need to make sure that people don't think it's, the majority opinion. And I mean, let's face it, journalism is always looking for something a little edgy and a little offbeat too. But the thing about coronavirus, and I mentioned this in a column I had last Friday, is I hope one of the lessons we learned from this is having some kind of a newfound respect for science. I know that's a bit of an idealist there, but it shows there are real consequences. I mean, you think about this, and people have talked about this, the war we're in, and you think about the whole world being in a foxhole, and the people who are, refusing to social distance or refusing to cooperate, they're kind of the whiny people in a foxhole that you don't want in a foxhole, but you're stuck with them, And it is a war, and you still have to protect them. And they're annoying, they're aggravating. You're afraid they're going to, help the enemy because they're panicking or they're not, cooperating with your effort or your defense down there in the foxhole. But you're stuck with them there. And
I think it might be World War One, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, you need to, and that's kind of the way I see, with climate change too, is, you need to fix the problem. You still need to fix the problem whether or not everybody's going to cooperate or not.
Right. All right. Well, Tom, thank you very much. This has been a great interview, and we've got to move on in the show. But so if people want to read more of your environmental reporting, how do they do that?
www.toledoblade.com, and you can search under my name there, or Google me to Tom Henry and Toledo Blade. We have a new slide app that that's a new feature at the Blade that is a little different than the traditional website, and offers more graphics and more photos and so forth. But and of course, there's still the newspaper subscriptions that those of us like me and others who are still passionate about print newspapers can still buy or subscribe or pick up at your newsstand there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tom Henry.
Okay, thanks a lot for having me, Joe.
Sure. All right. Well, that was Tom Henry, and now it's time to hear from our fantastic sponsors.
All right.
And For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways you can get in touch with them to find out what's going on at the parks, especially in this light of the COVID. One is to simply call them at 419-353-1897, or you can go to their website, wcparks.org, or you can download their nifty app, and you just go to any app store and search for WC Parks. So thank you to the Wood County Park District. And we also like to thank our Patreon sponsors. We couldn't be doing the show without them. And these are people that have gone to patreon.com and searched for A Green Future. And then they found there that there's a page with all kinds of levels of membership that you can put it in and have a monthly withdrawal from your checking account. There's an amount for any budget, and it's a nice page, and you can go. One level we recommend is there's a dog and a cat level, and they're both the same monthly amount, but you're registering which one you like better. And right now the dog level is way ahead of the cat level. I don't know, you cat lovers, you might want to get on there and subscribe at the cat level just to get your favorite species a little more publicity there. And so those are our sponsors. So we are again, the interview with Tom went a little long, but I think it was worth it. What do you think, Rebecca? Do you think
It was good. That manatee thing, I read someplace the reason you're not supposed to touch the manatees is because if they don't feel like being touched, they might go to some other area of the water which is too hot or too cold for them. I forget which, and then they can actually die from the wrong temperature just because they want to get away from you so badly.
All right.
So they don't have any claws or teeth, so people think that they like you, but sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
I see. But Tom said if they come up to you and want to be petted, then it's okay.
Right.
So,
if they touch you first, and if they start things, then it's okay for you to pet them.
So consensual petting is the big thing here with manatees. So.
Exactly,
right, well,
but humans have trouble with that concept in regards to each other, so,
That's true.
You gotta go over it with them before they... Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very true. Sad, but true.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so now we go on to our eco news, and a lot of eco news to cover this week. Hope we can get through it all.
Yay.
One is, I touched on this earlier in the show, and that is that this time of the year, spring, is typically when nuclear power plants shut down for refueling. And the reason is simple. Demand is the lowest in the spring. In the high summer, you've got a lot of air conditioning going. In the winter, you've got furnaces going with their blowers. So a lot of nukes shut down this time of year for their refueling. And unfortunately, they are being affected by the COVID virus. And we reported on this last week. And so the NRC's response to this is to let them, go on skeleton crews of, inside the plants.
Oh, boy.
And we're talking people trying to sit at those control panels for up to 90 hours a week, according to the new
Oh, dear
NRC
Lord.
emergency guidelines. 2, they're letting them skip the inspections, the kind of inspections.
Wonderful.
Right, the kind that discovered the Davis-Besse hole in the head just before the plant exploded.
Oh, dear.
So they're saying, no inspection, skeleton crew. And then the last one is sometimes they're letting them say, okay, you don't have to refuel. But as we said last week, but as we said last week, the problem with nuclear fuel rods isn't that they run out of energy, it's not like gasoline or something like that. The reason they have to be taken out and replaced is because they become so radioactive after being bombarded with neutrons in that nuclear furnace for years that they actually become unstable and uncontrollable. And so that's why you have to take out a quote-unquote spent fuel rod, not because it's going to stop reacting, but because it might just run away on you and be unstoppable. So
I did not know that, and now that I know, I'm not reassured.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have to break that to you, Rebecca. But, had you listened to the podcast of last week's episode, you would have been prepared for this emotionally.
Oh, no.
But here's another, and I'm afraid this is going to alarm you even more. The Limerick nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania is one of those plants that's shutting down for refueling. And I discovered in The Reporter, which is the newspaper for Lansdale, Pennsylvania, story they published yesterday, headline, Workers Terrified at Limerick Nuclear Power Plant.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, the reason they're terrified is that these refuelings are done by temporary workers, like typically about 1,500 people will be brought in to do the refueling because they get massive radiation doses doing this, so you don't want your usual people working because they'll use up their radiation doses for a whole year trying to do this refueling. So they bring in strangers. They bring in people.
I've worked as a temp before. I dropped a few phone calls when I was doing that. I remember. It wasn't good.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, they're temps that run in, turn a valve until they get their year's worth of radiation, then run back out again. And so,
oh boy!
But it takes thousands of people to do this. And at Limerick, the reason the workers are terrified is that they have clumped all these people together in cheek-to-jowl conditions. That they're doing the training in little training rooms where there'll be 50 people in a tiny room, and if any of them have COVID, in 2 weeks they're all going to have COVID, and that's why they're terrified, because they're not following any kind of procedures that would protect them. Well, actually, once the story broke, they started semi-following them, but this story that ran yesterday says that a lot of times they physically help them because people have to be cheek to jowl. Like some of those valves need 2 or 3 guys to turn because they're so big and heavy. And also they actually really literally don't care about the safety of the workers. And this is my opinion. I may be, Limerick Power Plant Company might come and try to sue us for that statement, but in my opinion, from what I've read, they don't care about the workers. So, So sorry to have to share that terrifying story with you, but I think it's important that people learn this stuff.
Maybe so, yeah.
Another environmental story, this isn't exactly environmental, but it does have environmental impact, and that is that because of all these lockdowns, the demand for petroleum products, the demand for oil, has dropped so significantly that, like the oil sands market in Canada, a lot of oil is crashing because the price is so low. And one interesting thing that I read out of Canada is that some grades of crude oil have gotten to the point where they're quote unquote selling for negative amounts.
Dear Lord, they're paying you to take them, basically.
Exactly. The people who used to buy it from the refineries, they know that the refineries are full, and they can't just immediately stop refining. They sort of have to attenuate it. They sort of have to taper off production. They can't just shut it off. And so the customers are saying, "Oh, we'll take that from you. You just pay us, 20 cents a barrel, and we'll take it." So this is part of why the air is not now so much cleaner. It's because a lot of these refineries are actually in the process of shutting down. And electricity demand is also down. And I wanted to say that story about the terrified nuclear plant workers had one huge lie right in the middle. Mm-hmm. And that lie was that the electricity from the power plant is needed for the local hospitals fighting COVID. And that is just a straight out lie, because electricity demand is dropping. And nuclear power plants...
Isn't everybody watching TV all the time? Doesn't that put it up or something?
Yeah, but you could watch TV for like approximately 10 years and you won't use as much electricity as a huge industrial machine.
Good point.
Yeah, and those are the big machines, the big demand. That's what's shut down. And I found a study out of Britain. It was in the UK. It was on a website called The Conversation, and they're estimating about up to 10% of electricity has declined, and about 40% of energy demand for transport has declined since their lockdown in the UK. And our lockdown here, I think the numbers are actually even higher. That's my opinion, because we don't have the most efficient energy sources, and so if you shut down a factory here, you attenuate a lot of demand. So, and also one interesting thing is that the peaks have flattened, and that is that the way things normally work, almost everybody gets up at the same hour in the whole country. Gets up, takes their shower, makes their coffee, and it's a huge demand for electricity that first thing in the morning. And what's happened is now everybody's sleeping in as late as they want, and so the peak is going away, and so that also is a big reduction in demand. If that curve flattens out, that's kind of the way hybrid cars work, is that you don't need to have as much power if you never have those big spikes in demand. So
because let's face it, when you have to stay 6 feet away from everybody, there's less incentive for personal hygiene. There's less of a rush about it.
Right. And so and there may actually be less personal hygiene going on. It's true.
I have reason to think that there is.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, I in order to get sharp for the show, I did do the full, I shaved, I did everything, but I'm thinking most people aren't doing that most of the time. But the big reason that whole thing about the nukes being needed for the hospitals was a lie is that that's not how electricity works. Huh. You can't say, oh, the power from our nuke plant's going right over to that hospital. No, all the energy sources all over the country put into the grid, and all of us users take it off wherever we are. And so to say that the nuke plant power is going to that hospital, that is incredibly inaccurate. For one thing, the nuke plant is shut down and the hospital's still running. It's shut down for the refueling, and so it's obviously not needed. And I think, my opinion, the decline in demand is about equal to what the nukes are putting out. So I think we could actually shut down our nukes right now, and we, for the most part, maybe have to leave one or two of them up in some parts of the grid, but for the most part, we could shut down all these dangerous nuclear plants and ride
just
out
until we
COVID.
can get the solar grids up, right?
Right, because the solar and the wind are still going up. So if we accelerate those projects, we would not just ride out COVID. We could come out on the other side of COVID with a cleaner, greener grid, and that's what true leadership in our country would be pushing for at this crisis. Not doing things like eliminating the EPA's enforcement of their environmental policies and so forth. So, all right.
As opposed to the clownery we have going on right now.
Yeah, exactly. Who are doing exactly the opposite of what the nation should be doing during this crisis. And I wanted to point out there's another democracy in the world, South Korea, and they are handling this process the correct way, and they are just going ahead with their national elections. They're going on right now. They didn't have to postpone things. They didn't have to close the polls. And they don't have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people sick and thousands of people dying because they did it the right way. They actually paid attention to the scientists and read stories like the ones that Tom Henry files and applied those to their public policy. And that's the key to keeping your democracy healthy too, not just your family and your friends and your the society healthy, physically healthy. That is why their democracy is still healthy in the time of COVID, and ours is faltering. So I've kind of been delaying this and beating around the bush about this because I'm kind of sad about this. I got the letter from the future, Rebecca, but it's really not a letter.
No.
It's more of a note, and it's
Uh-oh.
all it says is, great-great-grandpa can't write, terribly sick, radiation, lost baby.
Oh,
if survive,
God.
we'll write next week. So
boy.
something terrible has happened there in the future.
Uh-oh.
And
oh, geez. I thought things were so much better there, but I guess things still go wrong and have to be handled.
Well, remember what they're doing is they are trying to fix one of the problems that we've left them. And
right.
They're trying to
Gift
take
that
care
goes
of
on
our
keeps on giving.
nuclear waste, right? Which,
oh boy,
apparently something went wrong. So we'll find out more next week, hopefully. So
we'll all have our fingers crossed.
Right. All right. Well, I hear the music. I think we are reaching the end of the show. Thank
Coach
you all
Pumpkin.
so much for sticking with us. Thanks, Rebecca. It's been great having you back on the air with
Yes.
me. And don't worry, folks. We will be back next week with more of For a Green Future. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we're signing off.
Bye-bye.
Fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog.